From stepping onto a stage at 10 years old to stepping out of a decade-long abusive relationship, Kat Polsinelli's journey is one of resilience and transformation. Now, a sought-after speaker, best-selling co-author, and host of Real Chat with Kat, a top 10% globally ranked podcast airing on 4 radio stations and 2 public TV stations, she is on a mission to shed light on the unseen wounds of emotional and psychological abuse while empowering others to reclaim their strength. A survivor of domestic violence, PTSD, and single motherhood at 16, Kat speaks with raw honesty about the lasting impact of trauma, the power of boundaries, and how self-worth plays a critical role in healing. Through her personal story of leaving and rebuilding, she challenges audiences to rethink what they know about abusive relationships, fostering a deeper understanding of the complexities survivors face. Kat's powerful voice has made her a sought-after speaker for colleges, healthcare professionals, and law enforcement, equipping them with the knowledge to support survivors and create meaningful change. She has been featured in Nashville Voyager, Canvas Rebel, and Her Nation, and has taken the stage at universities, domestic violence awareness events, and criminal justice panels. With a no-nonsense approach and a compassionate heart, Kat sparks conversations, challenges perspectives, and brings light to even the darkest moments. Welcome so much, Kat, and thank you for joining me here on Perfectly Imperfect Me 365. I am so excited to have you, and I know that for many listeners, this might be a very tough topic to speak about and listen to. So I do also just want to protect my license and just that this episode definitely has some moments that you're going to share that can be triggering for some people and hard to hear. This is not to be used as advice, as to-dos, as in lieu of therapy at all. This is really for support, educational, and to give you a lot of hope. So, with that being said, thanks again so much for joining me. I'm really appreciating it. I'm so excited.
You are so welcome. I'm so excited to be here. I was excited when you and I got to chat the first time and all the other stuff. So this is going to be wonderful.
Yes. So I'm just going to kind of like open it up because there's so much. And I
So
kind of, I know your story is really of just like strength and like recovery and just growth. And but more than that, like you've now gone from like being a victim to a survivor to now you are empowering so many other people. And I think that's really important also. So I'm just going to kind of open it up and like share your story of like where did you start? Let's just how did you start this journey? Like where did you start? I mean, you said
ah,
16 you became a mom,
yeah,
a
yeah.
single mom.
A single mom. And what's really interesting, and the reason that I actually bring that up a lot is because I want people to have like the full circle story and understanding of what happened to me, where I've been, all the things that have kind of gone on, and what's kind of led me to where I'm at. When I'm sharing with law enforcement or like social work students, which I was just in front of 2 weeks ago, I was in front of law enforcement yesterday.
Mm,
I share a lot of my backstory to give people the full picture. And I say that because a lot of times, and this is myself included for a really long time, I felt like there were stigmas that were around people that had been through some form of abuse. And a lot of
absolutely.
times it was, okay, well, they were probably in an abusive home, or, they were in chaos, or there was a lot of dysfunction. And so, of course, they kind of went to that because, they kind of already had that. My background's actually completely different. I had a really great upbringing. I had a really wonderful home. I was the oldest of 3 girls. I had a lot of things going for me in high school. What I did was I changed the trajectory of my own life because I, of course, decided I needed a boyfriend at that point in time. And because boundaries and intimate settings weren't really a conversation in my household, I didn't know how to say no. And so for me, that got me into a situation where I ended up pregnant at 16.
Mm,
In that interim, I was a sophomore in high school. I was in all of my APs and my honors classes. I was in choir and anyway, all the things. And when that happened, one, I felt like a complete and utter disaster. I felt like I
mm,
failed my entire family. I came from a Catholic upbringing. My
wow.
parents were married. That's what you were taught, right? You have
Right.
children once you get married. So there were all these things that started coming out, and I just felt terrible. So
Mm,
for me at that point in time, that was kind of the beginning of feeling like I needed to fix the things I had screwed up. And
Okay.
I feel like that's kind of what leads into some of the decisions that I made down the road, which also then led into an abusive relationship.
Mm,
So I switched schools. I graduated early, second in class, president of student council. I checked all the boxes to
amazing.
make sure that I had made up for what I had seen as a mistake or a failure. In that interim, after graduating, my ex left. He went to
Okay.
go do his thing, and I became a single mom. I had a full time job at a daycare so I could take my son with me, and I went to college at night. In that space is when I met the other boy.
Okay.
And that kind of escalated because I felt like I was doing everything right. And my family was like, but you could be doing more. And I was
Mm,
also 17, 18, right? So I was like, I
yeah.
feel like I'm doing pretty good. And my parents had very, very high expectations. So there was a lot of tension, and that just kind of pushed us. And so this guy who came in was the complete opposite. He did what he wanted. He could talk to his family the way he wanted to. He had a lot of freedom. I was like, wow.
Wow. Right.
There's kind of like a magnetism there, right?
Of
Because I was
course.
looking for a way out of that household to be independent because I felt like I was doing the right thing. At that time, he also kind of took my son in, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is
Right.
exactly what my parents have, right? My parents have been together for 40 something years, and we have, our sisters and everything. And so it was kind of like, it felt like all the puzzle pieces were falling into place. And so I moved out and I moved in with him.
Yeah.
And then that's when things kind of started going downhill. Now, what I tell a lot of people is, it didn't start out in the very beginning with like big signs. Like I wasn't getting punched in the face, I wasn't getting shoved around the house and things like that. For me, and what I see with a lot of people that have been in an abusive situation is that with those little bitty signs that like we
Right.
just didn't notice. And so it
Mm-hmm.
was things like when I'd come to visit on work, he'd be like, "Well, stay a little bit longer." I'm like, "But I'm going to be late." "I know, but I just want to spend time with you."
Right.
And I ended up losing my job because of that. It was, every time that we talked about our future together, he was like, "Oh my gosh, and then we could do this and we could do that, and you're
Right.
amazing." And, all the things that I was hoping to
Of
get because now
course.
I wasn't getting that from my family.
Right.
So he spent a really good time kind of building that up. And at the same time, which I didn't notice then, tiptoeing around like what he could get away with. What would I allow him to do? How far would I
Right.
bend this direction? Right. So at the age of 19, I was pregnant with my second son, and that was his child. And so that just kind of complicated things even further.
Right.
Then that's kind of where things started to pick up. But at that time, I had already been out of my household for 3 something years. I now was pregnant with his child. I was still like, oh my gosh, but in Catholicism, I'm supposed to be with the person.
Of
So there
course.
were all kinds of different things that kind of correlated on top of that.
And you're
And
still
that just
19 years old. Let's just be honest.
yeah.
I mean, you're still 19. And at 19, I mean, if I can go back to remembering what I was like at 19, I mean, if it wasn't my parents, somebody needed to take care of me, right? Like I might have been able to take care of myself in the sense of getting myself to class, like getting my hair cut, like doing those things. But like having somebody like, especially with a child,
Hmm.
I'm sure like that kind of was a little bit of the glamour too to him of like, I've got you, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I do feel that. And, in all of that space, like I said, my family and I kind of separated a little bit, and then he kind of latched onto that.
Of
And
course.
so, when there were small issues, it was like, yeah, I mean, it is their problem. Look what they're doing. Look what they're doing to you. So it was really easy to keep pushing me away. So we get to a point to where, I'm 20 years old. I have two kids now. And my family is kind of distant. I still talk to them on occasion, but they're kind of the problem people, or at least that's how I saw
Of
it, right?
course.
And him and his mother are fantastic at like really feeding me that information. So there's no validation or outside opinions to be like, hey, I'm noticing some of this. You should probably be aware of this. Or, hey, are
Right.
you noticing that he's treating you this way? Like, that's not how people are supposed to care for each other. Like, none of that was happening because my family was away. And
Right.
when I was around my family, a lot of times it was that they just didn't like him. He was just a
Right.
jerk, so on and so forth, which unfortunately, in case anybody's listening to that, when you make the person that someone is in love with the bad guy, you push them closer to them. You don't help them escape because they're not seeing it logically the way that you do. They
Of
see it from a
course.
space of love, just like your kids, right? If your kid does something, you're like, oh my gosh, no, my kid would never do that. And then you see it and you're like, oh my God, they did that. It's
Right.
the same thing. It's this this form of love where it's like you want to see the good in that person. And so when you have someone on the outside that's just like, well, I think he's a complete jerk, or I think he's this and he's not doing this, all you're doing is pushing them closer because they think that you don't see what you see in that
Right.
moment.
So
um
would you make, so just real fast regarding that, like, because it really wasn't a transactional relationship with your family. It was more like they're telling you, and you're now back to that little kid that they're controlling. And here you have two kids, and you're a mom, and you're in a relationship, and you're not going to tell me what to do. But so, how would you recommend like a family? Because I'm sure there are plenty of families out there that might see these signs and and they're trying and their intentions are really good, right? Your family's intentions, I'm sure at that time were really good, but they just didn't know how to say it in a way that, and you may not have even been able to hear it at that time, but in a way where it was not like he's a piece of shit, but like, like we're worried about this. These are the things we're seeing. Well,
mhm.
how would you like recommend a family, if anybody's out there listening, that would approach their child or a loved one or even a friend that might be in a situation like that?
I love this question. And I get this question a lot when it comes to law enforcement. And it's like one of my absolute favorites because I personally believe that education is the key. So, what generally tends to happen in any form of abusive relationship is that person, me, the victim, is losing control. They're losing the ability to say yes or no. They're losing the ability to make choices on their own. They're being conditioned to believe exactly the way that that person believes, right? So, education is a really easy way to have a conversation with someone and come from a very neutral standpoint
Mm-hmm.
and allowing them to make that decision. Now, like you said, in that interim, would I have listened? I don't know, right?
Right.
Because I was 20, I was a mom, I was taking care of two kids, I was trying to survive my life. And so I had a lot of things going on. What I didn't understand, though, or know anything about at that time was one, what abuse was. Because
Mm.
for me, I was raised that abuse was like you ended up in the hospital, right? Like you had
Right.
black eyes and bruises. Mine was more emotional and psychological.
Right.
So I never associated myself as an abused individual because there weren't
Mm.
physical
Right. There
bruises.
weren't marks. There
Correct.
weren't the right.
So that having those conversations or explaining, you know, giving people educational material like, hey,
Okay.
I noticing this pattern and I don't want to say anything bad about the person that you're with. I love if you're happy with them. Here are some things that I've learned about. And I want to make sure that you're aware of it so you're making the best decision for your
Oh, I
life,
love
right?
that.
So there's things that you can do that you can hand to them and you can explain to them like, hey, have you thought about looking on this website? I learned this really cool information about those that are undiagnosed with bipolar or borderline personality disorder, which we see a lot when it comes to abuse. That's where a
Right.
lot of that stems from, which then in turn incorporates narcissism, which now
Mm-hmm.
everybody is a narcissist, and I need us to
Right.
start dying down that language a little bit because not everybody is.
I agree with
But
you.
there, there are things in there, right, where you can be like, I did this, for example, with my son. When my son was starting to feel the control from his father and was trying to figure out what to do, instead of me saying, oh, well, this is what he did to me, and this
Mm.
is what he's probably doing to you, and making him feel like I was controlling the way that he was thinking, I was like, hey, I read this book called Stop Walking on Eggshells, and it talks about borderline personality disorder and bipolarism. And I found some really interesting facts in here. And what was really interesting is it actually gives you like a bullet pointed list of what these people might be doing, even if they're undiagnosed.
Right.
And I think you should take a look at it because I feel like there might be some similarities with your father. And I want to hear your opinion.
Right. Oh, I love
So
that.
you're giving a validation, right? You're giving them the opportunity to take control. You're giving them the opportunity to agree or disagree. You're not telling them how they should feel, which
Right.
they're already getting from the other side.
Correct. I was just going to say that. It's then you're just basically showing them that this is actually normal behavior.
Yep. All you're doing is replicating that.
Mm.
And I speak with law enforcement about this a lot. Like, you have to be aware of how you're having the conversations with these people. And you have to also understand that when people are in certain situations like that, we don't identify ourselves as the definitions.
Right.
So I didn't identify myself as an abused victim. I didn't identify myself as a survivor. I didn't identify myself as someone who being gaslit. I didn't even actually know what that word was until like
Mm.
5 years ago.
Oh,
So there
wow.
are things that if you say like, "Oh, I feel like he's gaslighting you," There's a complete disconnect. You're telling someone how you feel, which they're already getting. So they're going to listen to you, but ignore it. And they're not going to hear what you're trying to explain to them. So if you hear something, right, and you're like, gosh, I hate the way that that made you feel. Is that something that happens often? Like, I'm not trying to
Right.
get in your business. I feel for you. Right. And if somebody opens up, which I've had a lot of people say, like, they're opening up and saying that they're not sure they want to be in this relationship, that's amazing.
Absolutely.
Right. That's wonderful. Like, thank you for coming to me and having this
Yeah.
conversation. Um, is this something that goes on a regular basis? Oh, you are seeing it? Do you think that maybe it's a pattern then? Or
Mm,
so again, you're giving them the control to then let you know how they think, which that's being taken away from them
yeah. So you're kind of
while
like
they are in
planting a
that
little seed.
relationship. You are. And I feel like
Yeah.
that's what you need to do because even when I made the decision 10 years later to
Wow.
get out of that relationship, it was the little things that got planted. And for me, it was stuff that I noticed with my kids that I was like, oh, there is no way that is happening. And I was like, oh,
Mm,
well, if I don't want my boys to do that, maybe I shouldn't be letting someone else do that to me. Okay, this is starting to make sense. So it's things like that where when a survivor, when someone wants to make that decision, they have to be the one to make it themselves. Otherwise, all you're doing is taking a wounded person away who is waiting for that person on the other side to fill that hole, and you just
right.
tried to create that gap. And it's a
Right.
lot easier for them to go back because why? They know that they love that person, so they see the hate, but they see the love more because we want to see the
Mm-hmm.
good in people. Two, they've already been coerced or they've already been made to start thinking the way that person does, so they're having
Right.
a hard time understanding and believing their own thoughts. And three, they they want to think on their own, but if you come at them and say, you have to get out of here, like, that's it, I'm taking you
Right.
away. Again, you're replicating the same behavior
Right.
and they're not seeing that you're trying to help. They just see you as being the same person.
Right. Right. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. So now you're 20. You have two kids. Your family's a little detached, and those little
Yes.
innuendos, the little breadcrumbs of control he's got.
Yes. And it's escalated. So now at
Right.
this point, it's become screaming matches. It's become him being angry at me and smashing the things that I own or throwing things across the
Mm,
counter. It's now escalated into things that I'm not used to seeing. We
right.
didn't have that in my household. And there's also the other side of it. Um, when you get to a point of, I'm not taking this anymore, or I would stand up, he would flip the switch. That's when he would get upset. Well, you don't love me and you don't understand. And I thought that you believed in
Mm.
me,
So
right?
he's the
They
victim
guilt
now.
trip you, correct. And now because you are a wholehearted, loving person, you're like, oh my God, I hurt you.
The
I am
rescuer.
so sorry.
Yeah.
So now you go from fighting for what you were just fighting for to I hurt the person that I loved. I'm a
Right.
horrible person. And then this is where it comes into where you start to lose the belief in your own thoughts and you start to believe in the way that they want you to believe. And when you
Right.
don't have the outside opinions like I didn't, it starts to build, right? I remember so many times sitting down and being like, did I really say that? Is that how that went down? No, no, hold on. He did this, this happened, but did I really stop? Like you start to replay the scenarios in your head, but you don't know where the truth and the lie
Right. So
is
you're questioning your
because
own sanity.
correct, you question your own
Wow.
sanity because you end up living in their world.
Right.
And that's what I tell a lot of people. That's what happened for me. I ended up learning to live in his little paranoid world because I didn't know how to get out of it.
Mm,
And so fast forward into that, we end up getting our own place. I think things are going to get better. Of course, I'm making the excuses for everything like, oh, we're going to be in a different area. We're going to start over.
right.
It's
When
going to
this
be just
changes, this will be
us.
different. It'll be different. It will be less
Correct.
stressful.
You're
Right.
always looking for the good side of things. And in that, I reached out to his mom because at that point in time, his mother was really the only person I really talked to.
I was going to say, ask you where, like, because obviously you had your kids young, you graduated early from high school, so you didn't have your typical like friends, homecoming, prom, like,
No.
right. So did you have friends like child, like, because I know like when I had my kids, right, I ended up like a whole different group of friends when I went to certain mommy and me's.
Mm-hmm.
Were you able to participate in things like that? And if you did, I've got to imagine you probably weren't sharing with any of them.
So after graduating and moving in with him, All of my high school friends went this way and I went this way.
Okay.
So I was completely zeroed out.
Mm,
I had one person that I talked with that I've known since fifth grade. We're still in contact. But she was doing her own life. She was
yeah.
getting married. She was moving to Hawaii, so way away from me. So the one person I had to spend a little bit of time with got taken away, or moved away, right? And so
Wow.
I became very isolated. And so I did hang out with his family a lot. And I still hung out with mine to an extent,
Hmm.
but it wasn't to the extent of, like you said, of explaining things to them.
Right.
Remember, at the age of 16, I got pregnant with my first kid.
Right.
Now I've got my second kid, and I'm still not married.
Right.
I'm already a failure in my eyes to them. So I don't want to tell them anything because I don't want them to tell me how much I have screwed up.
Right.
So I don't tell them anything. What I did end up actually doing was confiding in his mom. And it got to a point to where I remember showing up one morning and I was just bawling and I'm explaining her some of the things that have been happening and I'm explaining her to the things that he tells me and some of the fights that we've gotten into. What I didn't know was that she had been in an abusive relationship prior.
Mm,
So when we had this conversation, it didn't go the way that I thought it was going to go. She actually ended up giving me a book on how to be a better wife.
right. Because she thought if she could be a better wife, I wouldn't get this.
So she said, sometimes guys just don't understand. They need a little extra love. And that was it. So the one
Wow.
time that I reached out, his behavior is what got validated, not mine.
Right.
So now there's no reason for me to have a conversation with my family
Of course
because
not.
if she's already telling me, right, obviously I think that they're going to say the same thing. And so it just kind of continued to spiral. We were, let's see, fast forward to about probably 7 years into the relationship when we lived in our own space. I remember one argument in particular, and it was one of those screaming matches and all heated, but we were standing in the living room in this little bitty place, and like the hallway was over to the side and my kids' bedrooms were down the hallway. And I remember us yelling back and forth and arguing about something. But what happened was my two boys at the ages of about 5 and 7, they came out of their bedroom and during the argument, they come into the hallway. And in the middle of the argument, I hear both of my boys start screaming, "Mom, this is your fault. You're always starting stuff with daddy. Why are you so mean?"
Oh, wow. Because that's what they saw.
That's what they've seen. So
Mm,
that was my turning point. Like I remember everything kind of slowing down, and I remember the first thing that came to my head and I was like, there is no way in hell I'm going to let my kids treat a girl like this. And it was like that light bulb moment that I was like, oh my gosh, I'm allowing him to treat me this way.
right.
But I've been so focused on holding the family together and holding down 2 and 3 jobs at a time and taking care of my kids, like you're in such a space of survival mode and living
Right.
from day to day, you don't see in a 360 view.
Plus, you
And
had
that
all those
was,
beliefs in your mind, like your core beliefs. Let's just be honest. Being raised Catholic, your core beliefs are I should be with this man. I need to be married, right? I've already kind of in your mind screwed up.
mm-hmm,
I don't want to let them believe that they were right.
yep,
I get it. Totally get it. So that's, yeah. Wow.
yeah. So that was a big gut punch moment. And what I tell a lot of people is I would love to say that that was like, that was it. And I was like, that's it. I declared it and I'm done. But like you said, there are all of those belief systems. There's all of those ways of living. There's all the things that you've been doing on a regular basis. It's not that easy to break out of that.
Yeah.
So it took another few years to finally get out of that situation. But what happened in that moment was I realized for one of the first times in a really long time that it wasn't all me, that I wasn't the one that was causing all the problems, that maybe what he was saying was a lie because he didn't want to be wrong. And
Hmm.
maybe I should start paying attention to those things. And that's when I really started paying attention to what was going on around me,
Wow.
down to I knew what would set him off, what would calm him down, and I knew how to have a conversation to get what I wanted by making it seem like it was his idea.
Right.
And you learn to do that. And I think it's instinctual as well because you're also trying to survive. But I
Right.
started picking up on those things and I stopped fighting back,
Mm,
which really infuriated him, right? Because now he's realizing that he's losing control. Um, and so fast forward toward the end,
Which I
we
think a lot of people, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I
yeah,
think a
no.
lot of people have a hard time with that because they view that as this is my self-respect. I need to speak up. I need to tell you you're
Yep.
wrong. And what they don't realize is that it depends on what your objective is, right? Like your objective was to just not be battered anymore, like to just like have somewhat of a peaceful 10 seconds, right? To
Mm-hmm.
not set him off. So if it meant that you just didn't respond, even though he might escalate because you were no longer engaging, right? It was not going to escalate worse in that way at some time. I've got
Yeah.
to imagine maybe he did escalate, but, and it doesn't, you can still have your self-respect and not have to have that word.
Yeah. And it's a form of learning to take back your own control instead of allowing someone to lead you, which doesn't really make a lot of sense when you
Yeah,
first kind of think about it. But we do this on a regular basis, right? If we see someone's social media and they tick us off and we're like, oh, I gotta send this message, you're allowing that person to control the emotions that you feel with it. And
correct.
so you're reacting to it instead of sitting with it to figure out why and then choosing not to respond because not everything needs your response.
Correct.
But when you're in a relationship like that, you are taught that everything needs a response,
Right.
right? So it's definitely a really interesting dynamic when you start to flip that. And again, you go back through like, am I doing this for the right reason? Is this making it worse? Are my
Right.
kids going to be harmed because of this and that? Like, it's really interesting the way that the brain is set up to work.
Mm-hmm.
We think that the brain is set up to see right and wrong.
Right.
And that is absolutely not true. The brain is set up to keep you safe,
To protect you.
to
Correct.
protect you, because you are a body and it doesn't want to die, right?
Right.
So, in its eyes, being in a relationship like that, even though we logically, right, can see now that that is a horrible situation, the brain is like, but I know what's going to happen.
Right.
I know if this happens, this will happen. I know on this day, this is probably going to happen. I know if I bring this up, this is. There is a pattern in some form of an outlook. But
Right.
when you tell the brain, like, I want to completely change every bit of this, I want to drop it, I want to start new, your brain goes, that's a black hole. We don't
Right.
want to step into the black hole. What if we fall off the black hole? What if we fall to our death? Your brain sees it in that perspective. And
Right.
that was something that I didn't learn until I started my own healing journey. And I was like, oh my gosh, like that's
Right.
so crazy to know the way that our brain actually thinks because we are not taught that. We think as
Right.
humans, there is a right way and there is a wrong way. But
Correct.
your brain only sees that when you're in a logical state. And when you are surviving,
You're in,
that whole
right.
area is completely shut down.
Of course. Yeah. You're not in a wise mind space. And
No.
that's why a lot of people don't even remember like any kind of abuse from a childhood or any of that because that's exactly what the brain does.
Yep.
It protects you.
Yeah, it does.
Wow.
And I agree with that as well. When I think of the things that I went through, I have flashbacks of certain things that I can remember, but I can't tell you a whole lot that went on in that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
What really sucks about that is that also means that I don't have a lot of memory of my kids when they were younger
Mm.
because you don't have the capacity to be able to remember all of
Yeah.
that. And so that's probably the one thing that sucks the most. It's not of everything that I endured, it's knowing that I don't have all those memories to share with my kids when
Yeah.
they were little and, doing things with them or, stuff like that. I have bits and pieces that show up, but it really stinks when your kids come to you now when they're 21 and 17 like, "Oh my gosh, mom, do you remember when I was this age and we were doing blah 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 and I did
Right.
that?" And I don't have any recollection of it.
Yeah. You were trying to survive. You were just trying to survive.
Yeah.
Wow. That's I mean, as a mom, it's just tough.
It is. It's some very complex, interesting dynamics.
Yeah.
um, and it has really put me in a beautiful place to be able to look back at it and share it in a way that others are going to be able to relate to and hopefully make a different decision at a much earlier stage than I did.
Right. And if they don't, and they ultimately do get there, or if they're listening right now and they're just having that first thought of like, this is not normal, and like maybe I need to think about leaving, that's the first step too. And everybody takes their own journey at their own times. And hopefully it's on the sooner end, right? Because we've all seen those datelines, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
signs were there, but like, the would have, could have, should have. But, you know, so then. And just to go back, like those 7 years, they escalated from like him throwing things and punching holes in walls and things like that. Did he get physical with you after that? Like the 7 years, I know you had said 0.7 years, like you hadn't had any of that. And I say any of that, but like, like they say it like as if, like, I know like just from my own education and working in the past with like, some survivors that some people have said, I almost wished like that they would have just like physically hurt me because the emotional, mental, psychological abuse that I
Mm-hmm.
endured was so much worse,
Yeah.
And I think you go back to what you said, like, and maybe that's where the education comes with even the law enforcement. Like, they come up to a domestic violence call and but the woman's not battered. She doesn't have bruises all over, you know? But that doesn't mean she's not being abused. And I think that's a big piece.
Yeah, and that was for me for a really long time because I didn't have anything that I could tell anybody, right?
Right.
So what I always tell law enforcement is like, what was I supposed to tell people? That he's being mean to me? Now,
Right.
obviously, things have shifted in law enforcement since I was in that relationship. That was back when I was 18 to 28. I'm now 38. So there's definitely been some escalations and some changes and some better education and things like that. And there's still the other side of education of us as individuals not realizing what is being done to us and realizing that that is a form of abuse.
Right.
Um, and I think that's why it's so important to share my story because yes, the majority of mine was emotional and psychological. Were there physical altercations? Absolutely. I was choked out when I was 6 months pregnant with my second
Mm,
son. Actually, when I finally had him arrested, it was one of the very first times I had instantaneous bruises. We got into a really physical altercation in the house, and I had a busted lip and bruises on my arm and my back and stuff like that. But a lot of it was non visible. It
right.
was not anything that I could photograph. It wasn't anything that I
You
could
had no
see.
proof. Right.
You had no proof. And again, at that point in time, I was always told or thought that abuse meant physical. And so there was never that correlation. There was
Right.
never that connection. Even when I went to the domestic violence center, I was like, so this was one instant. And then as I started sharing my story, I learned like, oh no, wow, like my entire 10 years with
Right.
this person, that was abuse. And it took me a really long time to like put those two together because
Yeah.
again, you're not using those definitions, you're not using those terms, you're not using that wording to describe yourself because you see it over here. And so it took a really long time for me to kind of put those two and two together and
Right.
understand all of the different things that can happen in a relationship that is considered abuse without anyone actually touching you.
Right. Wow. For sure. And I think and I think today there are still some women that probably still have that thought, like, I have nothing to show. Or
Mm-hmm.
maybe they even do go to the police station and they're like, well, what has he done? And like, it's hard to describe actions when you're almost questioning your own sanity.
Yeah.
Right. So you decided at that moment, like you called the police, and was that the end of that? Like, was that the stepping stone for you to be like, okay, I'm out?
So after the incident with my kids, that was the beginning of understanding who he was and
Right.
kind of starting to separate myself from his beliefs, his world, and all of that. About 2.5 years after that, I we had the physical altercation, which was after I'd sent my kids to school. And funny enough, after the whole thing, I was like, I have to get to work because I was the only one that worked. And I had a medical job at that time. And so I got my scrubs on. He got me together and he took me to work. We only had one vehicle. So he was the one that took me to work and dropped me off. And I went to work. I went straight to the back. I cried, cleaned my face up, and was like, okay, put the
Wow.
mask on. I have patients to deal with. Now, in that space, I was thinking of like, what do I do? Do I want to go back home? Do I not want to go back home? Like, I was fighting with myself tremendously
I'm
in that
sure.
moment. What's really interesting is I had a patient at that time that I had become friends with because they were getting into their law degree. And we always chatted about it because they usually came in at the very last of the day. And I was always curious to know what they were doing and stuff like that. That one particular morning, they were my first patient to show up.
Oh, wow.
So he came in and I did the therapy on him and I started asking questions. And I can't honestly tell you what I asked him, but I think I was trying to like poke around to figure out what would potentially happen because my biggest fear that was in my brain but had also been told to me from my ex was I would lose my kids.
Right.
And his father was in law enforcement and his mother worked for the judicial system. So those were constantly used against me because I didn't
Fear.
understand the law, right?
Of course.
Yes. And so I don't know what I said or what I managed to give away, but what I do remember is we got done with therapy and I remember putting up the equipment and he said, "You have two choices before I leave today." And I was like, "Okay." And he was like, "Either you call the police or I call them for you." He said, "I work in the domestic violence center at the courthouse."
Wow.
So he was the reason why I ultimately made the call because even though I was thinking about it and there was a possibility I was going to do it, there was a very high chance that I was going to go back to what I knew because I didn't have a plan to figure out how to get out.
And you
So
didn't
he
probably
is
have a
the
lot of
reason
support.
I didn't. Well, and no one knew, right? We were
Right.
fantastic at putting faces on. I worked at this medical office for almost 5 years. No one knew. And I worked with my sister.
Oh, wow.
No one knew what was going on, right? We are really great at hiding the things that we don't
Of
want people to
course.
see. So I did make that call. I had to be driven up to the domestic violence center by the police officer. I was like, oh, this is awkward. Super nice. But we started the whole process. And then that turned into a 4.5 year court battle on
Wow.
and off.
About
And
the
that
kids or the divorce?
it was the kids, it was the domestic violence. I had him rearrested for stalking 45 days after I had him arrested for domestic violence, on and on and on and on. So it was a combination of all kinds of things that I fought, and fighting for my children, um, and trying to get what I thought was best for them, and the court's not listening.
Mm,
So there's a whole nother side of it, and that's the other piece that I love to share, especially with law enforcement, is for people to understand that like there is a huge why someone doesn't leave, and that's a whole
yeah.
onion in itself. And then you have afterward, and you have the failed judicial system. You have the people that dismissed you and didn't believe you. You have, if you don't have a support system, you fending on your own and trying to figure things out. There are so many complications. And then, of course, if you have someone like my ex was, they are so frustrated that they have lost that control that they are now doing everything they can to get it back.
Right.
And that is the other why that I talk to is why people drop their case, why people end up going back. And a lot of it has to do with these scare tactics, the stalking that is happening, the pleads and the I'll never do it again things. And you want to believe that there, again, you have another layer and another onion to unpeel
Right.
that's already on the other side of it. And when you don't have a lot of systems that support you and support a survivor themselves,
Yeah.
you're fighting for your own beliefs. You're fighting for
Yeah.
your own courage that you're hoping you have a grain of. And do you know, to anybody that's listening that's like, I feel like I'm in that space, please don't give up.
Right. And it
Please
might
don't
feel
give
like
up.
you're fighting for your life because you are.
You are. And it may feel like you're not getting the justice you deserve. I did not get the justice that I deserved. But you are still making a dent and
Right.
you are still changing patterns and you are still choosing the direction that you want to take your life.
Right.
And that ultimately leads you to being able to control where you want to go in the future.
Right. So although you may not get ideally the what you want from the court system, you still get the choice to not go back and to
You
live your
do.
life the way you want and to have your voice heard. Wow. So you go through the 4.5 years. of this court battle? And then now, where are
So today is a much
you?
happier story. Now, when I got out of that relationship, my boys were 10 and 7. Um, in that interim, my youngest one did go back to spend time with his father. He did end up having visitation for a little while. Um, about 2.5 years ago, he started noticing that his father was doing some of the same tactics or that he had seen with other people. So we started having kind of an educational conversation. I wanted it to be his decision
Right.
to step back from his father, but I needed him to have to be his decision. So we had a lot of conversations, and he ultimately is the one that chose to take a step back. Now, I'm very blessed in that because in the state of Tennessee, you are not allowed to make that decision until you are 18 years of age.
Hmm.
When we were going through and battling court, COVID happened. And so, in that, our court papers were never finalized. So, therefore, because it had already been 2 years after COVID, everything had been thrown out. So, we would have had to have started court all over again if he wanted to come after me. And I knew at that point in time I had a complete advantage because I knew he wouldn't do that. So that kind of helped with
Okay.
all that, just so that people understand. Because I know a lot of states, your child does not get to make that decision,
Right.
even though I wholeheartedly believe that they should be able to make that decision if the child is evaluated, not because you have one conversation, because there is coercion from parents on the
Of
other side.
course. But he's
Um,
also at that time he was 7.
he was 7 when we left.
Right. So
Yeah.
so 15-ish. I
Yep.
mean,
He was
14
about
and a half,
14,
15.
15.
Yeah, I mean, they pretty much start to see things in their own eyes in a lot of ways. Yes, there are many situations that, you have parental alienation and things like that. There's no
Mm-hmm.
question. But yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So we were very blessed in that instance, and he got to kind of pull back because he was starting to have panic attacks and having a lot
Mm,
of issues and stuff like that. And that kind of gave him the space to kind of like my situation, gain his own control, make his own decisions, have his own thoughts, start asking questions about things. And I just left the floor open to have those conversations. I never
right.
pushed anything on him. I never talked about what I went through as a comparison. I just tried to give him the space to educate and understand for himself.
Right.
In that, his father just kind of fell off. He was married, he's got 3 kids of their own, and so he just kind of disappeared. And that was probably one of the best things that ever happened for my son. He is now flourished in
Mm,
his high school years. He is a senior now. He's been
that's
in
amazing.
ROTC for the last 4. He has been captain of one of his competition squads. My oldest one is now getting his armed security license. He's wanting to move out of state. Like they're
Oh,
starting to be able
wow.
to build their own lives. And it took me healing and getting through what I had been through and opening up to my kids to explain to them how I felt about a lot of things to create that scenario.
Right.
It took me being vulnerable. It took me telling my kids that I feel like an absolute piece of crap. I feel like you guys went through things you should have never, ever had to experience. And that makes me a horrible person. And I had my kids tell me that that is not your choice. You don't get to choose that. We do. We get to make that decision. And so it was a really beautiful space of validation, but we had our ups and downs. We had a really hard time for a really long time, so it wasn't picture perfect.
Yeah.
But that is the reason why I speak today is to share that because there are so many people in this world that are fighting things on their own, that are fighting
Right.
things in the dark, that feel like nobody would believe them, that nobody would see it that way, that if I told someone what happened to my children, they would guilt me into a pair. What you have been through is what you have been through.
Right.
And if anybody shames you or guilts you for it, that's their freaking problem.
Right.
But don't keep yourself in the dark and hate yourself because that ultimately ruins your life and the lives of the people that you're surrounded with. And if you have
Yeah.
children, you're taking away a lot of things from them that
Right.
they should be growing and learning from you. And my children have become my teacher from the things that I have seen because I have allowed myself to be in that space.
Right.
So they are now getting their own lives. I met a wonderful man 6 years ago who has been an
Mm,
absolute dream. So we've been married now for 5 years, and
that's
now I
awesome.
get to speak to all kinds of people about my story, and they get to see the other side and they get to ask questions. And I feel like what we are doing is we are building a space where we are teaching people not to judge people
Right.
by what you see, but to
100%.
lean in with curiosity, to lean
Right.
in with a space of understanding, because you never know what someone is going through
Absolutely.
behind closed door. Like I said, I worked a full-time job, two of them at once. No one ever knew.
Right.
And I was in that relationship for 10 years.
Did you ever ask that guy that came in, your first patient, like what was it that made him like figure it out and say it? Or maybe the questions you were asking were just like out of your norm kind of questions.
Yeah, I never got a chance to go back. I ended up actually leaving that job, and my whole life kind of got flipped around
Right.
in all of that. But I do think that it was probably the way that I was asking certain questions
Right.
that probably gave some hints. And the fact that he worked in that space, I'm sure he learned to be very aware of
Right.
certain conversations or the way that people are wording things, So I'm sure that it gave him some inclinations
Right.
as to what was going on. And I thank him every day that that is the direction that he forced upon me, because I was on that cusp of wanting to do it
Yeah.
anyway. And I think I just needed that little bit of push.
You needed somebody to kind of like hold you accountable in that moment. Because it's
Yeah.
hard to hold yourself accountable. Like you said, you've got the I love him, he can change, hope, right? And then, oh my God, I gotta leave. He'll never change. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the time we see the positives, which might be few, and we
Yep.
forget the long list of negatives, right? And
Yeah, you
so
bask in all the things that you enjoy, right?
absolutely.
All of those moments, and those little moments become like, that was a year's worth. No, that was like 2 days.
Right.
Um, and it also doesn't help that, when you're in this cycle of good and bad, it's not predictable, right? It's a completely unpredictable cycle. It may be 3 months that you guys are good, and then it's a whole month
Right.
of absolute crap. It may be 2 weeks, and then something happens, and then it flips right back and
Right.
you're good. Like, it is so unpredictable and so hard to come back to it and puzzle piece it together because of that, that it
Right.
almost feels like it's an individual instance,
Of
right? Like,
course.
oh, it was just, he just
Just
didn't
this one
mean
time.
that, just this
Right.
one time, right? And I think that's what complicates it even more, because again, you're not thinking logically, you are trying to survive, and you're trying to live your life, especially if you have kids, right? You're trying to think of them, you're trying to put them first,
Of
and you
course.
don't make the space to, like, okay, let me take a step back, let me look at a 360 view. You just aren't in that space to be able to do that.
Right. So for the listeners, I want them to know, A, what if there are any resources aside from you and things like that that they could reach out to, but like a reminder of like that it is not just a physical thing, and that many listeners are probably, if they're listening, thinking about, oh wow, my person has said that or done that, right? It's
Yep.
just the little things about control, right? You can maybe not go away with friends. You can't go to lunch here, right? And at the moment, especially if you, and it wasn't in your case because you grew up in a very loving family, but if you were not raised in a loving family, you are soaking that. Like you're interpreting as that he wants to be
Yeah.
with me all the time. Like he
Yep.
loves me. And I think it's so important to recognize that that separation, attachment, jealousy, fighting doesn't equal love,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, that is definitely the biggest one. And we all want to be loved. We all want to be
Of
accepted. We all want
course.
to be, taken in by someone, and we want someone to care for us. And especially if you grew up in a broken home, you're craving that.
Of course.
And so that does make you more vulnerable to things like that, unfortunately. And that's why I tell especially students, that it is so important for you not to focus on having someone in your life. Yes, I want you to find the love of your life, but if you don't know how to love yourself, if you don't know where your own boundaries lie and what you're
Hmm.
willing to put up with and what you're not, you open yourself up to things like I was a part of. I
Right.
didn't know how to set boundaries. I didn't know how to say no. All I wanted was love and affection, and I wanted what my family had,
Right.
and I opened myself up to that. When I got to a space of healing and saying, like, I will not deal with this anymore,
Yeah.
I will not put up with that, it really shifted who I let in my life, who I allowed to speak with me, and who I allowed to stay in my life. And that's
Right.
to this day. There are certain things that I don't put up with because I'm like, nope, I don't want to be a part of that. That's
Yeah.
drama. I don't want to live my life that way. I love my life. I love what I get to do. I love the way I get to wake up every single day. And I have seen the other side. I have
Right.
seen the very dark days where you just want to fall in a hole and make it all go away.
Right.
And I also know what it's like to stand in that light. So it is possible. And I
Yeah.
think that's something that we need to be reminded of, is that it is always possible to flip the script, to choose something
Absolutely.
different, to do something different in your life. And I
Yeah.
say that from personal experience. You asked about um, places where people can get support.
Yeah.
There is all kinds of things nowadays, right? There are local domestic violence centers, sexual assault centers, and places that are usually in your area. If you cannot get in touch with them, there is the National Domestic Violence Hotline that you
Mm.
can call. You can literally text begin to 88788 and start a conversation with someone who is willing to listen to you to help you get out of a situation. You
So
can
you
even go
type
to
what?
their
Begin?
it
Type
is
the word
begin,
begin.
yep, to 88788.
I'm going to put that in my show notes for sure.
Yeah. So there are all kinds of resources out there. If you're not sure if you're in a relationship like that, if you feel like things are being done that you don't necessarily agree with, I have two books I strongly suggest that you take a look at. The first one is called Stop Walking on Eggshells. It is an
That's a great
amazing
book.
book. It gives wonderful examples that you might be able to relate to, that might be able to help you see a different perspective. The other one is called Codependency No More.
Mm-hmm.
I have never seen myself as a codependent person. I am independent. But there are things and there are situations that are in that book that you might be able to relate to. And if you can relate to that, that might help you understand where you're at in your relationship and the direction that you want to take it or the direction that you do not want to take it. So
Right.
there are all kinds of resources out there. The Domestic Violence Center, it is thehotline.org. You can
Okay.
literally hop on their website. They'll even tell you when you show up that if you feel unsafe or if you need to clear your browser history, please be sure to do so that you don't
Mm.
leave tracks. So there are things that you can do to get you to situations, or to get you into a better situation. What I tell everybody is please just reach out. Reach
Yeah.
out to someone. There are organizations all over the place that can help. You just got to get to it. Even if it's just a friend of yours that you say like, hey, I don't feel safe and I don't know what to do. I don't need your opinion, but I
Yeah.
don't know what to do. Have them reach out on your behalf.
Yeah.
Have them coordinate it for you if you feel unsafe doing it yourself. There are ways to
That's a
get
great
out of
suggestion.
there are ways to get out of what you are in. You always have a choice. And I know that that choice sometimes feels absolutely impossible and improbable, but you always have a choice.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know that this was so, like, it was a tough subject for many people, I'm sure, who's listening, and probably even just for you. I could, like, and for me as a mom, like, to hear, like, the pain that you must have gone through to hear when your kids said that, you know. What I also love is how you found a person 6 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she said, because at that point, if I'm doing the math right, which it's been many years since that was at least 4 years when you left that relationship. You had to have done a lot of healing because I think that as a therapist for me, and a lot of the things that I see is that so many people are so afraid of being alone. They don't even know what it's like to be alone. And so, unfortunately, when you don't even know who you are and what you believe your worth is, and if you attach it to a man loving you or choosing you, you're going to choose the same type of person because that's all you know. Because you don't
Mm-hmm.
know anything more. You haven't learned anything about yourself. You probably didn't, and I'm not saying you, but like people have a hard time even knowing how to love themselves,
Yeah.
right? And saying, okay, this is what I'm not going to tolerate. I'm not okay with that. And there's nothing wrong with spending time by yourself. I tell my clients, I promise you, you're such a good person. Like you just got to find a time to just see what many of us see in you.
Mm-hmm.
Find it in yourself because when you're constantly looking at it from other people, right? it's very hard because then you go to that wise mind. Like you can't choose a person from a wise mind,
Yeah.
right? I look back at my past relationships. I was in one abusive relationship that I actually didn't think it was abuse in college because he never touched me.
Mm-hmm.
But when he would ask every day what I ate, did I go to the gym, how many hours I went to the gym for, what I was doing, why was I eating that apple at this time, that's abuse. And you know, it took me like, I mean, I finally got out of it. Why? When he grabbed my wrist. And for me, that threat of you break my whatever thing I was holding of his at the time, and you break that, I'm going to break your wrist. And at that moment, I thought to myself, you are not looking back because if he's going to make this threat now, and that, I will tell you something. At that moment, I didn't even realize that all those other things were like the emotional abuse.
Mm-hmm.
It was only after I left that relationship and got into some therapy. And many of my clients and probably even family members may not even realize that because I don't know that I've even shared it a lot with people. My husband now knows because we've shared it, like I've talked about that. But it's amazing. I didn't actually even realize that him asking me what I did and how I ate and what I was doing is all emotional abuse, psychological, to the point
Yeah.
that I got so like I started to question my own, should I be eating this? Is this a good choice? Like, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so it is. It's not just physical. And I think if anybody can take anything away from this, is that it's like a wolf in sheep's clothing, right? You don't know. And
Mm-hmm.
if there's something that you're questioning or you are starting to question, like you said, is that normal? Like, did I say that? Like when you start to question your own stuff, you know what you said.
Mm-hmm.
You know what maybe your intent was. Maybe you didn't say the word, but no, no, no. Maybe you even know what you heard, you know?
Yeah.
And that I think takes time. And I think that takes a lot of introspective like work because and then you were allowed to you allowed yourself, I should say, not were allowed, but you allowed yourself to let a really good human into your life
Mm-hmm.
because you recognize that's what you deserved
Yeah.
and you were not settling for anything less.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that we are not taught enough that it's okay to be alone. There's all these stigmas in society that you should be married at this age, you should have kids at this age, you should be doing this at this age. Like
Right.
screw all that. What you do and what you do in your lifetime is what you do in your lifetime. Like it doesn't
Absolutely.
matter. There is no timeline that is wrong or right. It is the way that you decide to live your life. And I will say that learning to be with myself and love myself has allowed me to love my husband and love my kids and then be like, I'm going to go be by myself. And this is wonderful versus feeling
Absolutely.
like I owe something to someone all of the time. And
Hmm.
that's a really precious place to be because you are putting yourself first. And, we all hear you can't serve from an empty cup. That
Right.
is 1000% true for
Yeah.
absolutely anything that you do in your life. So, and, I still was at the very beginning of my healing journey when I met my husband. So it's not
Hmm.
that you can't find love while you are healing,
Right.
but it's being aware of you and yourself and the things that you want in your life and you don't want, and being okay with saying, yeah, no, I'm good.
Right.
Because you then create a space where you are open to having that different relationship. My husband has dealt with a lot of the things that I've had to heal through, but he created a safe environment where I was able to have the conversations and I was able to heal with it with his help. So I
Right.
still went through that. So it's not that you can't find love, right, until you're completely healed, but you
Right.
do need to set your own space, your own boundaries, your own understanding of you and what you ultimately want in your life before you open the doors to say you can come be a part of it.
Right. Because if you can't provide it for yourself, then you're going to expect it, request it, demand it from others. And then you're going to probably get it in a way that isn't really like genuine. It's
Mm-hmm.
usually met with some control and some underlying like things.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I so appreciate you. And like for everybody, you got to go check out your podcast because I mean, I quickly looked at some of the topics. I was like, oh my gosh, these are amazing. And I just hope that, people get, I'm going to put, if it's okay, I'm going to put your contacts in my show notes and all that as well, like your website and things like that. Because I just think it's so important because education, and if somebody's in law enforcement and you are listening to this and you are observing that your colleagues, your peers might need some education, Kat is that person. Because
Oh, I
no, it
appreciate
is.
that.
It's like it's just we need more of it, you
And
know?
it's a very hard topic to talk about, and I understand that not everybody wants to have that conversation openly. I am 110% behind you in keeping your story private. I know that part of the reason why I went through what I went through was because I knew I had a voice that I could spread for others. I've always been that type of person. I've always stood up for other people. So if I can stand up for those that want to keep their secret to them, that is absolutely fine. I will use my story and share it with those people to make sure that your voice is heard,
Yeah,
even when you decide not to.
absolutely. Well, I appreciate you for joining me. And so don't forget to tune into Kat on her Real Chat with Kat. And again, thanks for joining me on Perfectly Imperfect Me 365. I so appreciate you. Have a good one.